One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights, the only podcast dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. Hello, my name is Alex Mason, and I am your host. Thank you for joining me today. What are we about here on this show? We're just all about learning investment banking. That's it. We're not talking about anything else. So if that's what you're here for, you are in the right place. Thank you for all of the returning listeners. I really appreciate you sticking with me over these last few months, going through all these episodes. And if you're new here, welcome. Now, we're talking today about technicals, specifically accounting. And remember, accounting is just that fundamental domain of knowledge that you absolutely have to know if you want to be an investment banker, because it really just touches so many things in finance. It really is the bedrock of finance in terms of the language of how we describe things. So it's super important. And we're going through a more advanced accounting question today, which is this. Walk me through a revenue model. Walk me through a revenue model. Now, anytime you hear one of these walk me through such and such questions, you're going to have to do your research because there's usually multiple steps to it, like walk me through a DCF, walk me through a merger model. Those are questions that we've covered in the past. And frankly, like I need to review some of those because I've already forgotten like little bits and pieces here and there because they're multifaceted questions with multifaceted answers. So here it's actually a little bit more simple because there's really only two main sections of this answer for walking me through a revenue model. But before we get to that, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We have to first ask ourselves the question, what is a revenue model? And the answer to that question is a revenue model is a financial model that uses several assumptions to predict the revenue profile of a business. And that's my personal definition just after looking into it a little bit. Because when you have a business, you want to be able to have some kind of forecasting tools in order to better understand what kind of revenue the business can generate. Because if you have that forecasted, then you can better forecast what? The free cash flows of the business. Remember, free cash flow is derived from revenue, right? And if you can better forecast free cash flows, what can you better forecast? Your enterprise value, your equity value. You can better understand the value of a business, which obviously is important for mergers and acquisitions, right? So that's how these things kind of connect, like why we would want to do a revenue model in the first place. So there are two approaches. The first approach is a bottom-up approach. So when I say bottom-up, that means we start at the micro level and then we build up from there. So here are some questions that you would want to ask and assumptions that you would need to make in order to build a bottom-up revenue model. So remember, we're thinking small here. We're thinking granular. So question number one, what are the products or services that we're offering? Very fundamental question, right? Every business sells a product or a service. And so we need to understand that from the get-go. And then second question, equally as important, who are the customers? Who are the customers? If I was to sell you a water bottle, like you might buy it, right? Because everybody needs to drink water and everyone carries their beverages in something. Like that's not a super specific thing. But if I went to you and said, hey, I want to sell you a Peloton, like maybe you're all about Pelotons and you just love riding on those things, but maybe you're not really a bike person at all. Or Maybe you think the price of a Peloton is too high, and so there's no way you would even consider it. There's so many different factors that go into that. But fundamentally, as a customer, what are you as a person more likely to buy based on your profile and your spending habits? So defining who your customers are is really important. I mean, I even think about this for this podcast. Even though I'm giving you this podcast 100% for free, in a way, you're my customer because I am selling ideas to you and you're paying me with your time and attention. And so I think about who are you? Well, you're probably a university student, either at the undergraduate level or the MBA level. You are probably looking for a job in investment banking, just like me. Like there's all these different aspects that make up who you are likely to be because you're the kind of person that resonates with the ideas that I'm sharing on the show, right? So that's another fundamental question that you want to ask when building a revenue model. Who are your customers? Thirdly, you want to ask what is the average value of a sale and what is the expected customer lifetime value? Every customer has a certain monetary value in terms of the amount of money that they can be expected to generate for a company throughout their lifetime, basically. And this is a very big concept, for example, in the insurance industry, where policies get renewed year after year and people pay their premiums for many years. And so insurance companies are very keen on calculating the customer lifetime value for their customers for selling insurance premiums or insurance plans, rather. They're paying the premiums. So that's another question we can ask. Another question we can ask is what is the sales growth rate that we expect? For example, how much do we expect overall revenue to grow? Are we doubling our revenue every 5 years? Are we doubling it every 2 years? It just depends on the type of business and where we are in the development of that business. And then another interesting question, this is a concept that I wasn't as familiar with before really studying this, and that's what's the growth rate of the sales value that we expect? So not sales generally, but sales value. And what I mean by that is, as an example, how much are we going to raise our prices per item or prices per service? So if you grow revenue by 20% per year, there's different ways that that could be happening under the surface, right? You could be growing your customer base by that amount and you're charging the same amount per customer. But maybe your customers are growing at a 5% rate, but you're just charging higher prices over time. And overall, that contributes to your overall revenue growth. So those are some ways to think about it. And what I'm getting at here with these questions is that you're assuming all these basic level things about the economics of a business in order to come up with a prediction of the overall revenue that can be generated. So that's part one. The second approach, part two, is the opposite. It's a top down approach. And this is much simpler conceptually because we're thinking super big picture. So we might ask some different questions like this. We might ask, what is the overall size of the market for this product or service? Like, what is the total addressable market? It may be huge if you're selling water bottles. It may be much smaller if you're selling Peloton bikes because it's a much more niche product. So what's the overall size of the market? And then secondly, how much market share of that market can we capture? If you are a utility company operating in a certain region of the country, it's a very regulated industry, you probably own the entire market. In most markets, it's like you're basically a quasi government entity that pretty much has a monopoly. Or it may be a highly fragmented industry, and maybe you're just trying to capture this little teeny tiny piece of the market, but that's okay because based on the economics of your business, that's enough for you to make a profit and to generate cash flow. So it just depends. So think about your overall market share in this market. And then, of course, you have to also ask yourself, how will this market share change over time? Are you going to be able to grow your market share or at least maintain your market share? So if we look at these assumptions, we can multiply the market share in a given year with the size of the market. And that gives us expected revenue. So, for example, if it's $1 billion market and we think that we can capture 10% of it, well, now we're talking about 100 million in revenue, right? So if it's a $1 billion a year market, we capture 10%, multiply those two together, we get $100 million. And the thing is, this is a little bit simpler to calculate and understand than the bottom up approach. But the bottom up approach is really a little bit more, I would say, trustworthy because I think it's easier to define the assumptions accurately for that approach than with the top down approach. And for an example of this, there's investor relations departments of many large companies, large and small companies that are publicly traded, where you can go and read their investor presentations online. And a lot of them will talk about total addressable market, or TAM, which is the acronym for total addressable market. And they'll say our total addressable market is $5 trillion or like something crazy. They'll just spout out this really huge number. And then they'll say, well, if we could only capture 0.1% of this market, we'll all be rich. And mathematically, that's true. But the underlying assumption may be absurd because the real addressable market for many products is actually much lower than many companies predict that it is. And so it can be very misleading with those assumptions. Whereas if you took the bottom up approach and you said, okay, like I'm selling a water bottle and I'm pretty sure I can charge $20 for it if it's a high quality water bottle. And at my cost of goods sold, it's only $10. Other expenses are $5. I'm making net profit margin of $5 on this water bottle. I'm selling to athletes or outdoorsy type people, which means I'm going to be focusing on certain markets. Like there's a lot more strategy that you can, I think, justifiably do from that approach. But nonetheless, those are the two methods. You have this bottom up approach and you have this top down approach in order to create a revenue model for a company. And when I build one for myself, I'll let you know how it goes. But until then, conceptually, that's what it's like. Okay. Thank you for listening to Investment Banking Insights. My name is Alex Mason. I'm your host, and that felt good. Just, getting a little bit of a longer episode today for you. So hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day, and good luck with recruiting. I'll see you next time.